coming, and I am so excited to introduce Shauna Reitmeyer from Northwest Mental Health, who's going to help us through this journey, step by step. Thank you.
Step by step, thanks, Bonnie. This is, what a great group of women in this room. I am, I'll try to talk, they're recording, I'll try to not get nervous on that one. It's an honor, actually, to be with all of you. And I love your name of your group, the Butterfly Group. I have to say it was just the other weekend, and I was sitting in my backyard, and these couple butterflies came through my backyard, and I was like, that is Nikki, and that is Peggy. So those are two of the dearest people that, to me that I've lost, and so we all come with our own stories. We all come with our own journey, our own pain, our own healing, and what each one of you are going through is your own personal story. And so having a group of women like all of you together to share this common thread, this common bond, together is pretty amazing to have each other. So some of the things that I want to talk a little bit about tonight, and I would like to start it off with kind of a mindfulness practice, if you all would be so willing to work with me. And based on, you can do this sitting or you can do this standing, but it's a breathing exercise that I like to do that connects our body and our heads together. Because a lot of times when things are challenging, things are hard, you're in the midst of moments of grief, we forget to breathe. And when we forget to breathe, our head isn't thinking. And so I'd like to do this practice that I do, and I'm going to demonstrate once, and I would like to have you do it with me a couple times first. And what it's going to do is it's going to open our brains to be able to hear some of the messages that I'm going to share with you tonight. And so the breathing is just breathing in and raising your arms over your head. Circling your arms down, exhaling, inhaling and stretch back, and exhale down. So it's up with an inhale, circle down with an exhale, open wide like a butterfly, inhale, and exhale going down. So if you want to stand up and join me, or you can sit and do it in your seat as well.
I'll do it in the seat so we don't knock anything down. I have flying elbows.
So with one big exhale, raise your arms over your head. Inhale. Circle your arms to the side and exhale. Inhale out like a butterfly. And exhale with your arms down. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. And exhale. One more time. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. And exhale. And go ahead and sit down. Thank you for doing that with me. I do that a lot. Just so you know, whenever I go into any kind of, I did it before I left my office when I came over here, because speaking in front of people kind of makes me nervous sometimes, and so I like to get a little calm. You all are courageous, strong, and growing women. And I sometimes think that, and that's what I love with the visual diagram of the one handout that I shared with you, is of the jars. And, you know, I think there's sometimes this thought, like people say, like over time it's gonna get better, right? And that grief should be getting smaller as time goes on. But in reality, that grief really stays. It doesn't change, it just becomes a part of us. But it's what we do with ourselves to grow and around that grief. So we actually get stronger, we get more courageous, and we grow, and we become bigger around that grief. And the reality is you're all here right now, so that means you're growing, right? You're doing something and getting out of the house. And Bonnie, right, it's the first time you guys are back. You women are back in person together. And that taking action is a sign of growth and of working through and connecting with everyone. And I just love that. When I saw that, I'm like, oh, what a great visual to just have and remind yourself that, you know what, it's you. You're the jar here. We never stay static. We never stay the same. We're reading something, we're watching something, we're talking to friends, we're learning, and it is you, us, together that gets stronger and grows around the experiences that you've had. And you're growing not because of the grief or the loss that you've experienced, it's basically in spite of that, right? This has happened and having that opportunity. And this is that message that sometimes is a little bit hard to hear because it doesn't diminish the person that we loved that isn't with us anymore, to say, how do I use this situation, this grief, this loss, as an actual opportunity in my life? I can use it as an opportunity to think about those things that maybe I've never done before, that now I want to try this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to reach out to somebody or to people that I've never had a relationship with before, building friendships, connections, which are so critical and so important. Going to visit the family member that you haven't, and now, right, things are opening up a little bit more and feeling more comfortable of connecting with people. This was a really hard year this last year. You know, when you're dealing with isolation and not being able to be as social and grieving at the same time. And now we're at this point where we get to think about, it's not about the loss, it's about what do I get to create? How does my jar get to be bigger and fuller and use these opportunities to grow and do new things? You know, so is there anybody that has done something that you never thought you would have done since the loss of the person that you're experiencing here? Anybody want to share?
Started the group.
Started a group. And what a group. Wow. Which says, look at how common grief and loss is, right? And needing that sense of connection. So starting a group. Who else has done something that you never thought you might do?
I did my taxes.
Oh.
I did our taxes. That was just,
You bet. And now,
not that I've never done them before, but
right,
I
right.
always had somebody else to look at them. Now you have H&R Block looking at them.
Mm-hmm.
I still had to get it all together.
Yeah,
Thank goodness Chris had done that.
yeah.
He had a pile already for me, so or all ready for him, I think. So.
You bet, you bet. Those things that you're put in positions to do that you've never had to do before. That, you know, that's the part in relationships, especially if it's a spouse, that's part of the process is, you know, you kind of have roles. You know, this person does this and then I do that and then they're not there and you're like, oh, I gotta do this. And stepping into that unknown and then seeing I did it, right? I came out on that other side. There's the fear right here that might be in the way, but it's like, look at what I just did, and giving yourself that pat on the back and giving yourself first the permission to feel the feeling that this is scary and I don't know. We got to give ourselves permission. right? That our feelings are justified, they're real, and they're gonna be there. And then you get to take those steps and see how you feel when you come out on that other side. And so I'm not going to spend a lot more time on this, because the piece that I think is so important is that in the midst of grief, of making sure that you're still taking care of yourself throughout all of this. And connection is one of the biggest pieces. And so this is something that I put together. My dear friend and colleague, Brenda Mack, her and I have been doing some work on helping build resiliency in women in particular, and came up with what we call as our self-care stool, you know? And what I love with this stool concept, if you ever sat on a stool and it's been wobbly, like you can just feel it, or your chair, it's, you know, on uneven terrain. And the goal is you really want it to be as balanced as it can be, as much as possible, all right? We know there's gonna be times where it's not always gonna be balanced, but our hope is to try to keep it as balanced. And there's 3 areas in our life that is really, really important around maintaining self-care. And the first one is relational, and you're doing it right now by being part of this group. Having connection. So how many of you, you know, have seen, you know, the baby that's, you know, playing in the, you know, crawling around in the living room, and they take off and they're going, you know, like just mad down the hall, but then all of a sudden they stop and they turn around and they look, right? Like, where's mom, where's dad? You know, they're checking in to make sure that they're there. That, we have an innate part of ourselves. We're hardwired as human beings to be connected. We need people. And I would beg to argue a little bit with somebody that says, you know what, I'm one of those introverts and I don't like to be with people. Introverts still like to be around people. We just might not like big crowds, right? We might like better one-on-one interaction with folks. And so we really are, we're hardwired to stay connected. And so being a part of a group like this, picking up the friend, reaching out and asking for some help, building new relationships with people that you may never have thought you would have. That long lost friend that you know, never thought I'd be connected with, and you happen to find out where they are. Staying connected is so important. And so I use this example of, say, I always ask ourselves, who is your 3 a.m. friend? So if something happens in the middle of the night, who are you going to call at 3 a.m.? So think about that, right? And then I'd ask the question, does that person know they are your 3 a.m. person? Now, when I flip it on the other side, how many of you would be a 3 a.m. person to someone else? You probably could list all these people, your kids, your friend, your neighbor, your coworker. You'd probably list all of these people that you'd accept a call from. How many people did you think of who you would actually call at 3 in the morning? Usually that number's a little smaller because we're like, you know, we're Minnesotans, we're not gonna call people, we've got this, we can take care of this ourselves, right? So I bet there's some of you in this room with each other that would be a 3 a.m. person for you in this room, right? So I always ask people to find your connections and make sure that they know who those connections are and say it to them. So my friend Nikki, who's not with us anymore, she was my 3 a.m. person. She was the one, and we knew it. We told each other it and said, you're my 3 a.m. person. And you know what? Her daughters now say, Shauna, you're my 3 a.m. person. Because we made that a thing, right? We talked about it, and it was that important to us. So relationships, staying connected is so important. The other piece is this cognitive piece, and I kind of sometimes call it emotional. And it's that, like, how how do we talk about ourselves to ourselves? You know, how many of you kind of have gone through in your head of like, oh, why am I crying now? Like, shouldn't I be feeling better than I was before? Why am I, you know, I should have taken care of this. I always say don't should on yourself, you know, because when we start talking negatively about the things that are going on with ourselves, or we think we should be doing things more, that doesn't help us feel better, right? And so in that cognitive piece, this is where you really want to start, really be gentle with yourself. You know, saying, you know what, I am doing the best that I can today. And when we say that, that feeling and that emotional stuff that's going on in bad days actually gets a little shorter. If we stay thinking about the should've, could've, would've in a situation, that icky feeling lasts longer. And another kind of trick and thing to think about, so I love the saying, I'm doing the best that I can, and I keep a journal beside my bed, and it's basically my 3 good things journal. And when I'm having, I don't do it every day, but I know when I start, because I do it, I have the, you know, should-haves at times. We're all human, we all do it. It's how fast can we catch it when we do it, right? And say, no, we're gonna flip that switch a little bit. And so I keep a journal. And on those days where I catch myself, I make a point to write, what were 3 good things that happened today? And there's research behind that. People that have kept a journal of 3 good things for up to a month have actually been able to, and I'm not, you talk to your doctors, I'm not giving medical advice here, I'm talking about the research, right? Is that the research has shown people that have done that for consistently for about a month have increased levels of joy and happiness, and they've also been able to reduce antidepressants if they've been on them and having to take them. Because what you're doing is you're starting, our brain is hardwired, in the bottom of our brain is what's called the amygdala. And it's our fight, flight, freeze. It's those things in those moments that you just, it's automatic. We do it, right? And the goal when we go into that is we want to try to get out of that as soon as we can. So I like to say I want to get out of the downstairs part of my brain and I want to get upstairs. I want to get into the thinking part. Because if we stay in the downstairs part of the brain and that fight, flight, freeze, that is trauma-inducing. It raises cortisol levels in our body, and that's the stress hormone. That's the ones that makes you want to eat the fried, fatty food all the time. It's the ones that makes you stay in this hyper sense of arousal, and we never get calm. So when you feel like that anxiety stepping in because of you're in a situation that you haven't been in since the loss of the person that you're experiencing, you're in a situation where I got to do taxes and I've never done taxes before, that's when you do that breathing exercise, right? Do that breathing because you're engaging your body and you're breathing, and it shuts down the fight, flight, freeze part of your brain, so you can start getting into the thinking part. And when you get into that thinking part, that's when you can start thinking of, this is something that was really good today. This, you know, I got to be with these wonderful women on a Wednesday evening and get out of the house. And it's not just what was good, but why was it good? So you got to connect the what with the why, because the why is where the meaning is. And so that's a tool to kind of help that cognitive part of the brain, part of that stool. And then the last part of the stool is the physical part. And that's your eating. That's your exercise. That's the, you know, what are you drinking? You know, staying hydrated, drinking that water, and sleeping. You know, that's a hard thing for a lot of people, is sleeping. And so really working on sleep hygiene, trying to set a routine, trying to watch your caffeine intake, getting some exercise, even if it's a walk, even if it's just sitting in the chair and doing some stretches. But that whole piece, it all comes together because we are holistic. Our head is attached to our body, and our head and the emotional responses that we have impact how we feel. And when we move and when we do certain activity, helps also kick in what I call the natural antidepressants, which are the endorphins. They're natural things in our body. And when you move, and I'm not saying go off and now run the next, marathon or, a big aerobic class. It's just getting, just a walk around the house. There's a walk around the block. Just moving your body a little bit helps get those endorphins moving. And then you really get kind of that trifecta. You get that relational piece by staying connected with people. You have that cognitive self-talk where you start thinking about things that actually are good in your day when everything might feel awful. And it's a challenge. There's days where you might want to just throw that dang, journal or piece of paper away and say, this is a bad day. And then you just say, I'm giving myself permission to have a bad day. Tomorrow's a new day. And you just start over. And then that physical part, which is all of a stool. And now this is just a guide. It's just something to remind you to think about, what did I do for my body today? What did I do for my head? And have I reached out to anybody? You can put a plan, you can write down what works good for you, but it's just meant to be a guide or a tool. Because grief does have a lot of impact on how we think, who we decide we're going to connect with and stay connected with, because, right, people don't know, and people say, don't use the word stupid very often, but people say not some really smart things when people are grieving, right? And it's like, good grief, why, how did they, and so you're just like, okay, I'm going to breathe. They don't know, and get through that moment and move on, into that next situation. And so, I could talk, but are there questions? Are there, comments or thoughts? I mean, does any of this resonate with you?
Something that really helped me is, I read it some places, every month you take a word and do it, like gratitude. This month, I'm going to take everything, and if I'm disappointed with it, I'll find something about gratitude in that situation. And that's been a great help for me.
Yes, I love that, gratitude. I think that, and that could be part of the 3 good things. What are you grateful for today? One thing my husband and I did was we, every week, said one thing we were grateful for, and we wrote it on a slip of paper, and we threw it in a jar, okay? And on New Year's Eve, we dumped them out, and we went back and we looked at them to see what was our year, And so there's things that for you, yourself, can still do some of those things. And some of them, I went back and I was looking at that and I'm like, I don't know what the heck I wrote on that note. I don't know what that meant. Tried to put a date on it, and so I think that, gratitude can be found anywhere, and it's a great strategy. But what about other people? Other things? Have you found that's been helpful?
I keep a journal every day. I mean, I write what I do, where I go, that's what I do. And I've got a granddaughter that says, Grandma, I want that when you're done.
You bet. You bet. Journaling is a great way. It gets all those thoughts that are spinning in our head and gets them out of our head and on a piece of paper. Any questions?
I found 2 things that helped me in the first year or so was to write things down, because I couldn't remember when I walked into a room, but it was worse with the grief. But
Yeah.
the other thing and I've shared with other people too, is it's okay to change up your routine, to add something new that was different than what you might have done with your spouse. So it became a part of my new routine, and I still would incorporate our routine, but I had something that was just mine. And for holidays, you can change them up. And the year that Dave died, his birthday and Thanksgiving fell on the same day. Our son got married on the year, it would have been my first anniversary without Dave. Our son got married on that day. And it was good. And COVID, I think, really helped in that situation because we were forced to have a small gathering instead of 400 people that I had to deal with. But just changing things up. So we didn't have traditional pies. Dave loved ice cream and he loved popcorn. So that's what we had. And that's really been helpful. And I've shared that with other people, you know. And then we did notes and we put it in his stocking that very first year, and every year we're adding to it until we decide we don't need that. And then we take them out and we read a memory that they had with their dad, or, you know, I really miss you, Dad, I really struggled with this, but I know you're watching out from up above. So just things like that.
I think it's really important to talk about them and your memories of them, especially with family. It should not be put away. And I also think as much as you're comfortable with it, tell the story as often as you can. The more you tell the story, the lighter the heaviness of the grief gets, the more often you tell it. And cry whenever it comes. Do not hold it back. I can remember going to the freezer to get steaks for supper. And in my mind, I went, we'll never need 6 steaks again. And I just bawled my eyes out over steaks. That's so ridiculous. But I bawled my eyes out.
Yeah, yeah. I like that.
But then there's a peace too, seems, comes over you after you cried, you know, and you go, what are you crying for? But then a little bit later, you just, you know, that peace is there.
Don't ignore the emotion, because it's gonna come out some way, right? If you push it down here, you know, it's the whack-a-mole. You hit it here and it pops up over here somewhere else, and sometimes then it comes out maybe irritable and you snap at someone, or, yeah. That's great, great lesson.
I like what you said when you said, talked about, you know, if you're feeling bad, do it. And don't feel bad about, and all the things that you felt bad that you should have done, the things that you don't do are the things you regret the most, but you can't dwell on them. And when our daughter just died, we were all thinking, we almost drove ourselves apart as a family by some of the actions and some of the things that happened. We didn't connect, but everybody had a regret. And we still today have to get together and talk about that. You have to talk about some of those things too.
Mm-hmm. And acceptance. So there's this phrase that we just call radical acceptance. And it's one of those that can be challenging, but just accepting it is what it is, right? We can't change the past, we can't undo, we can't rewind in our world. And it's just like, that is what it is, and what I can do is what I do going forward, right? That's where we set the intention of where we go forward, but we can never go back. And, we very often can start kind of mind reading or creating a story in our head of what we think that person thought. We have no idea what that person was thinking. We have none, because we didn't ask the question, right? So don't create the story, because then it starts building, and then it brings with it emotion, and it's like, back to that, when you catch that you're doing that, it's breathe, and then kind of have that next, like, what is the action that I can do right now? Yeah, don't shit on yourself. Really don't.
I find getting outside and moving, getting busy helps. And if there's a tough day coming up, I always have to have a plan how I'm going to attack it. So the days before can be tough, but usually that day is better.
Yeah. Oh, I like that, planning and thinking ahead. Yeah, because there are going to be anniversary dates, there's birthdays, there's holidays, there's events that you normally would have that person with you, and they're not there. And who's your buddy, right? Who's your pal that is going to go with you and say, you know what, when you see me grab your hand, that's the sign, and we're just going to go, right? And it's okay to leave. You don't have to stay. And you know what, I say, the heck if other people are offended, then that's their own stuff they have to work on. You're taking care of yourself in that moment at that time. And that's where you're building back to the connection and having those close relationships with, at least one person that you can find that you can have that communication with is really helpful, because then you're not alone, and you've got somebody that you're able to connect with. Yeah. Any other questions? Well, again, thank you for inviting me, for welcoming me here to be with all of you tonight. And again, it was a true honor to be with you. So good to see all of you.